to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest-running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In today's episode 312, we talk about the relatively newly released Southern Headlands walk in southern New South Wales. We hope you enjoy. If you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about the Southern Headlands Walk, which is located around the Ulladulla region of southern New South Wales. This is a 20-kilometre walk, and one of the things that we find really interesting about this is the New South Wales government and the local shires along the coastline have realised that people come to their towns to hike and do adventures like that. And as a result, there's a number of these 20-ish kilometre walks being developed, particularly along this southern part of New South Wales. Now, the most obvious one would be the Murrumarang Walk, which was a bit over 40 kilometres. But certainly the councils are going through and pretty much connecting all these walks together in a series of bigger walks. So in relation to the walk that we just did, this was a walk that has joined together a number of smaller walks into the greater Southern Headlands Walk. And I think from there, it wouldn't surprise me if they then join the next series of walks together, which will pretty much tie into the Murrumarang Walk. That'll then take you through to Bateman's Bay. So I know going from pretty much Sydney all the way down the southern part of the New South Wales coast, the governments and the councils are really building these walks and building this connecting walk. So it wouldn't surprise me in a couple of years' time, and it might be 5, might be 10 years' time, that you will be able to do a series of one greater walk, and we've done an interview on that walk in a previous episode, by joining all these smaller walks together. In this podcast episode, you're going to hear a series of interviews that we recorded while on trail. This by no means was an overly long trail and didn't take us overly long, but it was an enjoyable walk, and we actually thought this was a really good walk. It's one of the better walks of this type along this part of the coast. So what we're going to go through and do is talk about what we saw on the day, make some recommendations about whether going north or going south is a good way to go, and what you can do to get the best out of this walk. As I said, it's really a 20-kilometre walk. In all honesty, you could do it as an overnight walk, but it's quite doable as a single-day walk if you've got the fitness. But there are some logistical considerations that we hadn't really thought about, and it wasn't until we completed the entire walk we realised there's some sort of gaps, if you like, in the knowledge base on this walk. Have a listen to our recordings as we went along the trail, then listen to the final section of this podcast where we do make some recommendations. Just as a heads up, if you are listening to this walk as a podcast, the write-up on our website is also up, where you can see a lot of images and video footage that'll help give you a bit of a picture about what we're talking about on this podcast. So it's worthwhile listening to this podcast while you're following along with the write-up, just to sort of put 2 and 2 together. Good morning. It's 7:39. We're down here in the Milton-Ulladulla area on the New South Wales south coast, and today we're going to be doing the Southern Headlands Walk. This is a walk that's always been there and available over a number of years, but it's been revamped, it's been upgraded, new facilities being put in and new signage. So we thought we'd come down and have a look at it, see what it's like. Supposedly it's a 20-kilometre walk, but we'll see how it goes. So we're here at the trailhead at the moment, which is the Matron Porter Drive Reserve. Small sign, but it does say that. And we took probably about 5 to 10 minutes to find out where the trail started itself. Because it does say follow the Banksia signs, and the Banksia signs is what they tend to use anyway for their trails. But when we walked over towards the beach entry, there's a sign that said Southern Headlands Walk. So it could be a bit clearer to say this is where it starts, but it's a pleasant little area, and you may not be able to hear a lot of the birds in the background squawking away.
Yeah, so this is going to be quite an interesting one. As Tim said, it's something that's been here. It's more formally connected up now. So it's going to be an experience of bushland, coastal bushland, beach, perhaps small towns and little inlets. And so we'll go in and out of civilization, I think, a few times. It's a nice one to explore, and it's probably a good example of what's in lots of people's local areas.
Okay, we'll just finish up and head off. It's around about 9:10. We've been going for just over an hour. We've covered just on 3.7 kilometres, so we're averaging at around about 3, just a little bit over 3 kilometres per hour. Taking lots of photos, lots of videos along the way. And we're also having to make up or stop every so often and have a conversation about where we're going. Sometimes you think you should be taking a path, and then you sort of realise, no, you are actually on the right track. I think the thing with this walk, I'd almost class it as a hybrid walk. It's not really an urban walk, it's not really a bush walk, it's somewhere that sits in between. So we've got beach walking, we've got walking through the suburbs, we've got walking through bushland, and at the moment we're just having a short little detour off trail, if you like, just sitting here at the headland looking over towards the township of Mollymook, which is a couple of kilometres in the distance. So we may actually stop for morning tea break there, I think. Lovely day so far. They have forecast a very small amount of rain, 1 to 2 mil later on this afternoon. But at the moment it's just overcast. I don't think we're going to have much of a risk of getting sunburn as it stands.
Yeah, it's a really interesting walk. Lots of people around doing lots of different activities. No one like us with packs on their backs, looking as if they're going to do the whole walk, though there are people with serious walking shoes on that we have seen. And as Tim says, it's a really interesting one. It is definitely a hybrid, and it's one of those, I think, broader experiences. Tim was saying that we've been coming here for a long time, but there are parts of this coast off the suburbs that we just haven't seen before. So this is the great value of getting out on foot.
Okay, we will head off, and probably the next time we'll talk to you, we'll probably be having a cup of tea, I think. It's just on 10 o'clock. We've stopped for coffee at just next to the Mollymook Surf Life Saving Club, and there's actually a race on, so there's a lot of people in the background, and you may hear a brass band starting up in the background. It's been playing on and off for the last few minutes. Weather hasn't changed still. It's warm, it's a bit muggy, but otherwise it is getting a tiny bit brighter, but the sun doesn't look like there's going to be any break in the cloud. We've got the surf life-saving person in the background, person doing his nut because people are ignoring him and not getting to the race start, but no one can actually hear him when you're away from there. So far, so good. And again, this is one of these sort of walks where, as I said, we've stopped here for a cup of coffee, and there's a couple of options around this area. We'll head through Ulladulla itself and probably end up having an early lunch there, only because there's so many good places to eat, and then finish off the walk later on. So it's a very pleasant little walk.
Yeah, it is. It's been quite good along the way. Quite a bit of sand walking, as you would expect. A couple of beaches we've walked through already. So the legs are starting to feel a little bit of pressure. But from here we'll head up into a really interesting headland walk, and we'll talk a bit about that when we get along.
Okay, and we'll finish our coffee and then head off. It's 12:20. We've just stopped in at the Fisherman's Seafood Takeaway / Seafood Sales area just at the harbour. This is a takeaway we've gone to for years. Really good seafood. You're sitting close to the harbour edge, and you can actually take your food over and just sit on some of the tables that are very close to the water itself. So we spent probably half hour, 40 minutes having lunch, and then headed off because it was a bit noisy, lots of people in there. Wasn't 100% sure which way to go. We ended up going up the hill and realised we should have come along the shoreline, and then the walk up the hill, up 110 steps, is sort of hidden just around the corner. So you walk past the sea pools, past the little grassy area there, and there's a sign that sort of points you uphill. As I said, 110 steps, so there's actually a seat right at the top of the stairs, so we're just taking a bit of a break. In looking at the online map, and again, it may not be accurate to scale, but based on that, we've done approximately 11.5 kilometres, and technically we should have 8.7 kilometres to go. We do add a bit of distance walking around the headland. We could have actually bypassed it and gone straight across rather than going around the headland itself. But realistically, I don't think we've got that 8.2 kilometres left to go. I think it's probably something less than that, might be by about a kilometre or two. So it'll be interesting to see what it actually is when we get there. But we've actually got my sister coming to pick us up. We've dropped our car off at where we started from, and she's just going to come and pick us up and take us back to the car again. So we're going to need to give her sort of half hour, 40 minutes notice so she can get from home to where the trail ends.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Some of the signage is really clear and obvious, and others we've found that we just need to follow our nose a little bit more. As Tim said, after lunch and we had a full belly, we probably followed our nose in the wrong direction. We could have done the easier route along the shore, which, probably is a bit of a message, I think. If it's looking that you've got to do too many climbs, then you probably have missed the trail a little bit.
Except for the 110 steps.
Yeah, there's no missing the 110 steps. A little bit puff when I got to the top. Tim did it pretty well, all things considered, and managed to count them as well. So far, out of no particular interest, the walk starts at Narrawally and finishes at Blackburn Head, I think it is. And I don't know what the rest of the trail's like. But just purely this 11.8 kilometres that we've done, it would probably be easier doing it from the southern direction heading north, but I'll reserve judgment to see what the next sort of 7 or 8 kilometres is like. Yeah, I think so, because it seems to me that things like the One Track for All is a, south to north track, rather than necessarily a north to south. So that was one section that we did earlier today. So maybe we'll certainly have that chat when we do the wrap-up. Okay, we'll just have a few minutes here just catching our breath, and then we'll head on. It's 2:20. We've done 16.5 kilometres, and we've been going for just over 6.5 hours. So as best we can tell, we've got 1.5 to 2 kilometres left. One thing with these headlands, the headlands are very much a choose-your-own adventure. So certainly the last 2 major headlands that we've had, you could spend another hour on each of them if you weaved around every potential track option. And this one's the same. Apparently we've got 2 choices to get to our end destination. But basically what we end up doing is getting onto Racecourse Beach, and that's our last beach, which takes us up to the finish of the track. Not quite sure how much longer we have to go in distance. We turned onto Rennie's Beach, and we were told it was 2.88. It was very specific kilometres to the end. And then we went along the beach and went up another mammoth lot of stairs. There were more than 110, I'm sure. And then it told us it was 3 kilometres to the end. So it's like, and there was no option. Looking at the map here, there is no way to get around the headland, so we had to do what we were doing. Yeah, so interesting. We'll see what happens and see what the kilometres are like. Because we are going up and down onto and off beaches, you do have to expect to go down, and steps are the most common way, and then the steps up. So quite a few steps down, quite a few steps up. So, if you're not into that, then this is probably not going to work for you, but it doesn't take that long. So if you take it easy, it's quite okay.
Weather-wise, the sun's come out now. It's probably been out for the last hour pretty consistently. The clouds all burnt off. The rain we were supposed to get, maybe we'll get it later on. I think it was supposed to come in around about 1, 2, 3 o'clock this afternoon, and it was only supposed to be a couple of mils. But I think we might get it later, but at the moment it's clear and sunny and it has warmed up. Okay, we're just going to have a little bit of a rest here and then we will head on. It's just after 3:30 and we've reached our destination of Blackburn Headland on the Southern Headlands Walk. Took just on 7 hours and 50 minutes and we covered a total distance of 19.7 kilometres, which is not too bad. The estimation or the walk is advertised as a 20-kilometre walk. But I think it's one of those sort of things, if you did all the optional extras that you could possibly do, and that's mainly the headlands where you're wandering all over the headlands, you could probably add another 1 or 2 or 3 hours on top of this trip. But we just picked the main route or the route we wanted on each of the headlands and just went with that.
Yeah, we did go out to some of the lookouts, but as Tim was saying, there are so many options and so many diversions or detours you could take that, you could probably spend a couple of days doing this walk if you really wanted to. It's really lovely. We've discovered all sorts of different parts of the coast that we didn't know that were there. We walked through a really lovely Banksia woodland with flowers and it was just so nice.
Okay, in this next section of the podcast, we're going to talk about the trip overall, what to do as far as how to get the best out of the trip if you plan on doing it, and possibly even direction we should recommend travelling and the time of the year as well. Thanks for following us. So that was our series of on-trail interviews from our recent walk on the Southern Headlands Walk, centred around Ulladulla in South New South Wales or Southern New South Wales. From our perspective, we have previously done the Kiama Coastal Walk and also the Murrumarang Walk, which are located both north and south of this walk. And each of the other walks has something on offer, but I suppose doing a direct comparison, this is very similar to the Kiama Walk where you've got interaction with urban Kiama region as well as walking on beaches and walking through some bushland as well. And I think from our perspective, we had this conversation on the weekend where we were doing this walk that the Southern Headlands Walk was probably more enjoyable. And not because the Kiama Walk, there was anything wrong with the Kiama Walk. It was just if we had to pick one, I think this would be the walk that we'd opt for of that style of walk.
Yeah, for me it was an interesting one because I think the variety is there on this Southern Headlands Walk and you're going in and out of all of those different environmental aspects. So you've got beaches and you've got nature reserves and you've got urban areas and, you can stop and have a coffee. So you've got the kind of, mini cosmopolitan aspect to it as well. And you're going in and out of that several times. Whereas I think the Kiama Coast Walk, you were either in it or you were out of it. It wasn't an opportunity to sort of, I guess, have some diversity throughout the walk.
Yeah. So we did this walk from north to south, and again, there's nothing specifically saying that's the way you have to do it, but normally when you look on the website, they do say, here are the trailheads, and it tends to imply that you are starting off on the northern walk and going south. But I think there are probably advantages and disadvantages of going both ways. Now, as I said, we started north and worked south, and I think in all honesty, that is overall probably the way to do it, because what that allowed us to do is we got onto Mollymook, I suppose, and had morning tea at the just next to the golf club, next to the Surf Life Saving Club there. And there was an event on at the time.
There's a swim meet happening. Yeah.
So there were lots of little food vans and drink vans available. But even when that's not there is a little cafe virtually probably 50, 60 metres away from where we were. So we could have easily stopped in there and sat at the cafe rather than grabbing a coffee and something to eat and sitting down on the grass. We then had an early lunch in Ulladulla, and it was probably around about 11:30, 11:45, I think we got there. So it was a bit early, but it was a good timing. And we could have potentially walked further on and stopped somewhere else in Ulladulla. If we had have been bothered, we could have walked the kilometre up the road and stopped at McDonald's, but that's probably a bit far away. We could have actually gone into the club there, the golf club. So there was plenty of other options for food. We chose the fish and chip place down on the Ulladulla Wharf, and it's a place we've gone to for many, many years.
Forever.
Yeah. It's an easy sort of place to get a park. The food's good. You can go, typically we usually will go and grab our food and go and sit on a couple of benches just on the edge of the water off the side of the harbour there.
Though we didn't do that. We should have done that because we would have then had the right directions for the continuation of that walk. But anyway.
And I think it was more about it was looking like it was going to rain. We thought, okay, we'll be somewhere undercover while we're eating. So, but I think that would work out well. Whereas if you're coming from south, I think you'd end up having nowhere really to have morning tea. You'd have lunch at Ulladulla still, and that's fine. And then you'd have afternoon tea at Mollymook on the way through. So it's more a matter of, are you an afternoon tea person or is it more a morning tea sort of person?
It's a little bit like that, isn't it? I think the other thing for me about going, whether you're going to go north to south or south to north, the signage sort of implied that you should go south to north. There was a lot of extra detail on what I thought were the back of the signs. And I think partly that's because they've probably used the existing signage and added extra signage. And so the only place to put it was on the back. But, that just seemed a little bit odd at times when you had a very basic sign and then you walked around the back of it and you went, oh, look at all that detail.
The other thing worth considering, and it's a minor thing, that after we left lunch and headed what we thought was the right way up the hill, only to discover we then needed to come down the hill again and walk past the sea pool. The sea pool. It wasn't really clear which way we were supposed to head. We were heading in the right direction, but we should have just continued walking along the shoreline, only because the sea pools were sort of tucked around and it wasn't so obvious. But when we left the area where the sea pools were, we had a set of steps with 110 steps on it. And that was probably the physically the biggest uphill incline of the whole day.
Yeah.
Going the other way, yes, there were a couple of things that would have potentially been tiring, but they were nowhere near as that big 110-step sort of staircase.
Yeah, I think there is that. I think the downhill bits, if you were heading south to north, probably would have been a little bit easier to cope with if you were going to have difficulty going up them. Going down them would have been a little bit easier. So that's another reason why you might want to think about south to north. But I think you're right that the north to south just seemed right, despite what we've just talked about in terms of the steps and the signage. It just seemed right to us.
The only other difficulty as well is we had my sister who lives in the area come and pick us up and take us back her place where we were staying. And one thing that she was coming from north of Ulladulla, she managed to turn into the car park quite easily, but getting out was a bit more complex.
So this is the car park at
Blackburn
Headland.
Yeah, Blackburn Headland. And I think that with that one, if you had been exiting that car park and turning left, it would have been fairly easy. But she was trying to exit the car park and cross on the other side of the road.
It was a busy road.
And it was like, go, and to get across there because the traffic was quite busy. Where if she had have dropped us off, or it might have been easier for her to drop us off in the morning and we would have walked back to our car. But The downside of that is that she would have had to get up fairly early. So, if you're having two cars, might be a bit of an easier thing. But yeah.
And I think if you're having a pickup at Blackburn Headland and you are coming from that northerly direction and the road it's the Prince's Highway, it does get quite busy. Coming out of the car park, turning left and going down to the roundabout and doing a U-turn and coming back up is probably a relatively easy thing. It's only a short distance down the road and that probably would have been the safest thing to do.
Yeah. Now, the other comment I'd make about this walk as well is the walk is advertised as a 20-kilometre walk. We ended up measuring 19.7 kilometres, so pretty close. It's only a couple of hundred metres. I think
we missed a couple of bits though.
I think this is one of these things. I mean, when you look at the three headlands and the map of the headlands, you could very easily spend an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Yeah, that's right.
Covering every walking track on each of these headlands, and you would have gone around. It's almost like a spider's web of trails that cross these headlands, and we chose to go the way we did and not go on every headland. We just picked the main route through there. The only other thing we potentially could have done as well is at the start of the walk at Narrawally, we could have walked out to the edge of the Narrawally headland, turned around and come back again, and that would have added probably that sort of distance we were talking about. But It just made a bit of sense to basically go from the car park across the little parkland area down onto the beach.
Mm-hmm. Follow the signage along the way.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that there is so much remnant bushland, woodland in this area. You just don't notice that it's there when you're doing your trip to and from the beach. So you can have the opportunity to wander around and, the South Pacific Heathland Reserve is just amazing. It's just quite beautiful. I was very enthralled by the Banksia woodland, but you could spend a good day wandering around there alone.
Yeah.
It's 14 hectares. You could spend a bit of time in there.
So, again, doing the trail by itself, aim on 20 kilometres, doing more than is necessarily associated with the track itself. Again, you could take a lot longer. So, if you feel like doing 23, 24 kilometres, it's probably easy enough to do. The other comment I'd make as well on this is, as we said, we probably spent about 10 minutes or so trying to find the correct start to the walk. So we got to the car park, we found the sail which said, talked about the trail, and it said follow the Banksia signs. All the signs in the area pretty much have Banksias on them, so that didn't help.
That didn't help us at the moment.
No, but we realised we walked past the little barbecue area, past the toilet block area, had a look at a sign that led down onto the beach, and lo and behold, it had Southern Headlands Walk. So that's why we virtually went straight onto the beach and started walking down. There are a couple of other points along the way where a couple of additional directional signage wouldn't have gone astray. And having said that, we actually had we've got good phone signal on this walk all the way through with any of the networks, so you won't have a problem there. I actually had the Shoalhaven City Council Southern Headlands Walk website up, and I'd scroll in to see where we were and where we needed to head, and that gave us a good indication. And that was particularly helpful. So whether you have your phone open or whether you just print a copy of the map out and carry it with you, it was definitely worthwhile having with us.
Yeah, there isn't a lot of detail on that map, and I also had I had Google Maps happening so I could double check where we were, and I did find that particularly helpful. The other thing we were kind of laughing about this today, but at the time I thought my, head was going to explode. It did make me a little bit confused. There are some street names that have the same name north of Ulladulla Harbour and again on the south of Ulladulla Harbour, and they're not connected. There's a big expanse of water in between, but there's this invisible line between the two. And you kind of go, haven't we been here before? And it's the same street name. So don't get confused by that. It's all okay.
Overall, really good walk. I mean, yeah, it's a 20 kilometre walk, and there's a day walk if you've got the fitness. Not a problem. You can do it quite comfortably. We did this in March, mid March, so it was starting to get a bit cool.
But it was not cool.
It was.
We were sweating like you would not believe when we got into that car. That's for sure.
I don't swim unless the air temperature's around about 30 degrees outside, which it certainly wasn't. So
you do sweat though.
But certainly you could actually, stop one of the many beaches, and I think in fact there are 10 beaches on this walk.
That's right.
And there's some really nice little beaches along there to take advantage of. So, take a pair of swimmers, take a towel with you. There's the option of breaking this up and stopping in Ulladulla as an example, either at one of the caravan parks or one of the hotels that are there, and actually breaking into a 2-day walk with 10 kilometres each day. Or, you could even camp, because you could stay in, go to get a campsite in the caravan park if you didn't want to stay in a caravan. So there are plenty of options there. But I think most people are going to do this walk as a day walk. We certainly saw a number of people with backpacks doing the walk, but not the full walk. They were doing sections of it. So I think unless someone was finishing behind us, I think we were pretty much the only ones coming our direction. And certainly we didn't come across anyone walking north.
No, we didn't. No.
So everyone was certainly heading south. So plenty of choice there, plenty of options there. It is a good walk. So if you are in Ulladulla, and as I mentioned earlier on, I think this is one of these walks where the New South Wales government and the local shire councils are building these walks along the coastline. I think there just needs to be a connecting piece between this walk and going down to the start of the Murrumarang walk. So you've got, I think, within the next few years, I think it will probably connect all the way through. And that's building just a greater walk all the way from Sydney all the way down the coast to the southern border.
Yeah. Look, I think there needs to be a lot of applause that goes into these local areas that are doing this. They're certainly adding vibrancy to their local area. It is, as Tim says, there are 10 beaches. It pretty much is a beach walk. That does strain the legs a little bit. It's good sand to walk on, other than I think Mollymook Beach was probably the toughest one that we had because of the slope and the soft sand. But, that was probably reasonably short-lived. It's a long beach, but it's short-lived. Some of the longer beaches were, relatively easy, particularly Racecourse Beach, which was right at the end. We were a little bit slow on that one, but it was still quite easy. We were more tired rather than it was difficult. So lots of beaches. So, yeah, get out there and get into it.
One final comment from me was not much in the way of wildlife. There was the odd bird around, but, nothing to speak of as far as kangaroos and wallabies and wombats and that sort of thing, or even snakes for that matter. I think a lot of the snakes have starting to go into hibernation mode at the moment. But I'm sure they're there, and I'm sure you would pick them up at certain times of the year, but certainly not a lot there. Lots of Banksias, as Jill mentioned, and again, that's the time of the year where a lot of them are coming into flower in late summer, coming into autumn, winter, so certainly an advantage. And I think in springtime you get a different batch of plants flowering as well. I think spring and autumn, avoiding the hottest part of the year, would be really good. Wintertime down the south coast, not overly cold in comparison to some parts of Australia, but it certainly would be cooler. So I think spring and autumn would be the peak for this walk.
Yeah, and to be honest, for that reason alone, I'd like to do it again at a different time of the year to experience the different flowering plants.
Okay, that's all for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed our overview of the Southern Headlands Walk in the southern part of New South Wales coast. That's all for me. Bye for now.
And bye from me.